The economic collapse that I wrote about in my '07 book hasn't happened yet. In that book, I did write about the housing bubble and why I believed it was going to burst, or why I believed there was a bubble.
You were right on the leading edge of that.
And I wrote about the ensuing financial crisis that would result from the bursting of the housing bubble. And so I did forecast the Great Recession that began in 2007. But more important than that was what I believed would come next. And that hasn't happened yet. That's the real crash. Because what really was worrying me was I was afraid the government would respond to the financial crisis by doing more of the same policies that caused it, which is more deficit spending, more cheap money, more central banking and central planning. And as a result, I think the U.S. economy is now poised for a much bigger collapse. I think that what's coming is a sovereign debt crisis and a currency crisis that will make the financial crisis of '08 look like the proverbial Sunday school picnic.
Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. It's come to my attention that a UFO was recently spotted flying past the Keiser Report window. Yes, Keiser Report is officially the most watched financial news show in the Milky Way galaxy and beyond. Following my abduction, I can advise you that the visiting aliens aren't interested in speaking to our leader, Doughball Dave Cameron. No dough balls for them. Instead, they were concerned with the credit derivatives bubble here on Earth. Apparently, the great debt ball of China can be seen from outer space. Stacey?
Max, well, Doughball is partly responsible for that debt ball because, of course, China is just mimicking the West in terms of creating this giant debt ball.
Doughball Dave. Doughball Dave. Lay off the donuts, Dave Cameron. You're an embarrassment to your country. Why can't he be more like Putin? Slim and trim. Got the judo going. Judo can spin Dave on his finger like this. Woo, 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 woo.
So let's talk about this great debt ball of China. Fitch says China credit bubble unprecedented in modern world history. So Fitch is warning that the shadow banking system is out of control in China. They warn that the wealth products worth $2 trillion of lending are in reality a hidden second balance sheet for banks.
Great debt ball of China, great debt ball of China, visible from outer space.
Well, this niche of this hidden second balance sheet, this niche is the epicenter of risk. Half the loans must be rolled over every 3 months, and another 25% in less than 6 months. This has echoes of Northern Rock, Lehman Brothers, and others that came to grief in the West on short-term liabilities when the wholesale capital markets froze.
Okay, so to explain this to the people, when you talk about the hidden debt market, I mean, this is the shadow banking system that people talk about. If you look that up, shadow banking system, everyone recognizes that the banks have off-balance sheet liabilities that are equal or exceeding their stated liabilities. And if you add the derivatives market on top of that, the off-planet balance sheet liabilities are over $2 quadrillion. Now, the reason why people freak out when interest rates go up even 1/100th of a point, a basis point, is because it means that roughly, according to my calculations, $60 billion of equity is wiped out in the global derivatives business for every 1/100th point rise in interest rates. Although people on the visible banking system will say, well, my interest rates are not affected that much by 1/100th point move. They don't understand that they have to look at the price of stuff like food and energy, which ends up moving up, as it is in this country, is hitting now 9% inflation rate in the UK, the real inflation rate, because of the implosion of the derivatives market, and the aliens know this.
Well, You know, so we have a situation, they're saying that 75% basically of the debts in this banking system, the shadow banking system, are under 6 months. They have to be rolled over every 6 months. But they also talk about the sheer scale of how fast this debt bubble has emerged in China. Overall credit has jumped from $9 trillion to $23 trillion since the Lehman crisis. Quote, they have replicated the entire U.S. commercial banking system in 5 years, Fitch said.
Well, it's telling also that the debt is mostly in 6-month paper or less. This is, again, an attempt to mitigate the exposure to interest rate rises by shortening maturity debt. I'm sure that most of that debt 5 years ago was on average 7, 8, 9, 10 years in duration. But over the ensuing 5 or 6 years, to try to save on interest costs, they've shortened up that debt. Now, the problem is that they're even more leveraged, more exposed to rises in interest rate. This is why when Ben Bernanke says, or any central bank says, we can get out of quantitative easing in 15 minutes, it's no problem. He's lying, he lied through his teeth, because when he got into the debt, maturity rate was 10 years, and now it's all 6 months. So it's like, Ben Bernanke is like a guy swallowing a porcupine. It's easy going in, because all the quills are facing out. But then trying to rip that porcupine out, the quills are facing the wrong direction, and you have one bloody esophagus, whether it's Ben Bernanke, the ECB, Bank of Japan, or this new character, Mark Carney, who's obviously been hit in the head with too many hockey pucks.
Well, of course, and you know, this is where this LIBOR rate rigging started, was the freezing of credit markets. So this is what they're concerned about, is 75% of this depends on overnight lending, essentially, that you need the immediate to roll over this cash. It constantly needs to be new liquidity emerging and new debts arising in the system.
Well, that's another problem, in that if you look at the repo market, which is the overnight loans, you know, banks don't have any balance sheets of their own. Actually, they outsource their balance sheet to the global, you know, repo market. The problem there is that here you have a problem of collateral, because they don't count those transactions in a way that would affect their collateral, although they should if they were being honest. So their stated collateral of these banks is overstated by almost an infinite amount. That's why HSBC, Lloyds, Barclays, Royal Bank of Scotland, Citibank, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs technically are insolvent. If you did a mark-to-market accounting of the actual liabilities on their balance sheet, you would find that they are insolvent. And it goes back to this 6-month or less global paper floating around that the aliens can see. They're flying by our show, and they're like, you guys are going to blow. It's going to blow. They're trying to warn people in other galaxies that if they have any money parked on planet Earth, get it out. Get it out of planet Earth, because that is going to blow.
Well, of course, the only way to pay off all of these debts is to grow out of it. And this is another thing that Fitch points out, is basically they've hit a point where it's impossible, because with credit at 200% of GDP, the numerator is growing twice as fast as the denominator. You can't grow out of that.
You know, any definition of growth must include wage growth. Doesn't growth mean wage? Now, wages over the past 5 years, unlike any other bounce in the stock market going back 60 years, wages have gone down. Every other stock market bounce in the last 60 years, you'd see a relationship between stock markets trading to new highs and wages trending up, or at least wages percent on a percent basis outpacing or at least equal to some rate of inflation. This is the only time since World War II you've had stock market bounce up, wages flat, and wages not keeping up with inflation. So not only are we not having any growth, but we're contracting.
Well, they do point out also that the home price to income ratio in many cities across China have hit 16 to 18 times. So obviously they're never even going to get on the so-called property ladder, which is just a euphemism for debt ladder. And also, we're hitting a Minsky moment, warns Societe Generale. They say the debt service ratio of Chinese companies has reached 30% of GDP, the typical threshold for financial crises. Wei Yao warned that the country would be on the verge of a Minsky moment when the debt pyramid collapses under its own weight. She said, quote, the debt snowball is getting bigger and bigger without contributing to real activity. So, of course, they've replicated the U.S. entire financial sector, as I said, within 5 years, and they've also replicated the entire U.S. economy within 5 years in that all the debt is not adding to any growth at all.
Right. This is what happens when you don't put bankers in jail,
Yeah.
and we don't have responsible monetary policy. Whether it's George Osborne replicating Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac with his Ponzi scheme here with Help to Buy, or it's China replicating the entire post-World War II American experiment with debt as a form of growth. If you don't have bankers in jail or responsible monetary policy, you end up repeating the same thing but on a much bigger scale. So here you have, let me say something, house price appreciation is not growth. Especially when for every $100,000 in house price appreciation, you're increasing the shadow banking system by $1 million until such point as it collapses. And that's what the aliens are saying. They're trying to communicate to us, but we're not intelligent. You know, the universe is rife with intelligent life. Unfortunately, the humans, of all the various life forms in the universe with cognitive abilities, we're some of the stupidest in the universe. That's why they don't want to make friends with us. We're like the stupid kid in class. There's a lot of smart, intelligent species around the universe, but they don't want to make friends with us because we're the stupid, slow kid in the class. Why can't we get a brain? Why is Obama so stupid? Why is Doughboy Dave Cameron such a fat idiot?